You ready to buy a sewing machine? Awesome! Congratulations! I'm so happy. Welcome to the upcycling and slow fashion movement. I have been sewing for about 20 years and I've bought several, maybe 12 sewing machines, and the first couple I bought, they did not work out so well. So I really want to save you from those pitfalls, and I'll tell you those stories so that you can see what happened so it doesn't happen to you. And we're going to go over some of your best options, what your priorities should be, and hopefully at the end of this you will be ready to go out and get yourself a fabulous machine. Step number one, are you ready for it? Do not buy a sewing machine first. No, it's like learning to drive. Like if you're learning to drive, the first thing you do is not get a car. The first thing that you do is you get somebody else's car and you learn how to drive it. And then when you have your driver's license, then you buy your car. So it's the same kind of thing. Here are a list of lots of places where you can borrow a sewing machine. So the first is you probably have a friend or relative that has a sewing machine. They're still around. Usually they're sitting in some dusty corner of somebody's storage, okay? Now, if you do have a friend that sews a lot, they might have more than one. And I tell you, they are not using both at the same time. That is very hard to do. They'd be happy to lend you a sewing machine and have a sewing buddy. So try borrowing from somebody you know first, because that's the easiest way to have sort of unlimited access. There are lots of other places that you can get your hands on sewing machines for free. A lot of libraries have sewing machines that you can check out. Some are even like the Boulder Library has a whole maker space with 9 machines and staff to show you how to use it. So a library is a great place to check. Maker spaces are also a great place to check. A lot of them have sewing machines because for all the different things they're constructing, somebody needs to put fabric together in one way or another. Another great place to get your hands on a sewing machine is through a sewing store. A lot of sewing stores, because they want to sell you a machine and they know you have to know how to use it before you're going to buy it, right? So if you just go in to look at sewing machines, there's usually somebody and maybe even classes in the store just to teach people how to thread up the different machines and use them. Another place to try and find a sewing machine that you can borrow is a tool library. Not everybody has tool libraries in their area, but Seattle did. Oh God, I love the tool library. It was so awesome. And last of all, if you're here in the north of Denver area, you can borrow one from me. Just give me a deposit and you can borrow one of the machines that I've been using at my Mend and Sew events. If you are here in the Longmont area, so sorry, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't touch you anywhere personal. If you are here in the Longmont area, on the 3rd Sunday of the month, I'm doing a free Mend and Sew event at the Firehouse Art Center, and please join us there and I'll show you how to thread a sewing machine. Now, if you are learning on your own, I have a little video where we look at several different kinds of sewing machines and you can figure out what the common elements are. They all have common elements. They're just done in different ways, and soon you'll be able to recognize those and pretty much thread up any sewing machine. And I would urge you to do 1 or 2 sewing projects before getting a machine, because you might find out that it takes either more patience, there are some tedious tasks involved in sewing, or it takes more troubleshooting. There are some intellectual tasks involved in sewing, engineering tasks, and if those aren't actually to your liking, if you're just thinking about the finished thing that you're going to make and not going through the experience, you may not even know if you need a sewing machine yet. Your first big decision is, are you going to buy a new machine or a used machine? If you're buying a new machine, I recommend that you spend between $100 and $200 on it, and that you're looking for a closed out model from 1 or 2 years ago, because the difference between that model and this model is probably there's some cheaper parts and better marketing on this model, and you're going to be very happy with that older model too. If you're buying a used sewing machine, then I would say up to $75. I wouldn't go much past $75 because you're practically into the space where you can get a new or a refurbished machine from a reputable seller at that point. Okay, a lot of what we're going to talk about for the new machines will also apply to the used machines. When I went to college, I'd already learned to sew at a young age. So for my first sewing machine, I just went to a thrift store and I picked up a used machine. It looked okay. I brought it home and lo and behold, it didn't actually work. So I went to the sewing and vacuum shop where they repair sewing machines. And they said to me, "Oh, we don't repair sewing machines more than 5 years old." So you need to buy a new sewing machine. There's nobody that repairs old machines. Okay, so that's 100% not true. There's lots of places, even to this day, that repair older machines, especially industrial machines. So bad information from somebody that wanted me to buy a machine. Don't take advice on which machine to buy from someone that has a financial investment in your decision. It's just not wholly pure advice. Even a well-intended YouTube channel, if they have an affiliate link and they're telling you what machine to buy, it may or may not be the best one for where you're at and what you want to do in your life and your values. And hopefully your values are a little bit like mine. Save money, save the earth. They kind of go hand in hand. Love that, right? Well, I did buy a machine. I bought the cheapest brother sewing machine that I could find in the store. It was $200. That's like, what, $600 now? I don't know. You can buy cheaper machines now, but at the time, that would have been like $600. And that sewing machine, actually, I have abused it. It's gone sliding around in the trunk of my car and been battered up. I've sewn through trash and glue and all kinds of things you're not supposed to do to it. It's still running, but I promised myself when I got that machine that if I was sewing 5 years later, I'd get myself a nice machine, and we will come back to that later. But so my first sewing machine ever was a brother beginner sewing machine, and it works. So my point here is that a used sewing machine is actually likely to last for a really long time. Even if it's been abused, it's probably still pretty functional. Now, I don't know as much about the ones that are coming onto the market now because I've heard on the grapevine people having real problems with those. I have not. Everything that I've encountered that's even just 1 or 2 years old has worked wonderfully. There are a couple features that are worth looking for. So a really golden feature not available on most machines is a speed button that's slow, medium, or fast. So that slow speed can be really nice for a beginner. With the bobbin, it's really your choice whether you want ease of inserting it or more control later on. So decide whether you'd rather have top loading or bottom loading or whether that's not important to you. There's also something called an auto threader. I've never been able to get these to work, but they're very common on newer machines. So if that's important to you and that works for you, then that's a feature to pay attention to. The auto threader is really only going to work when you have a medium weight thread and a medium sized bobbin. So if you're sewing thin fabrics and you have a smaller thread and a smaller hole, then that thing won't work. If you're sewing thick fabrics and you have a bigger needle and a bigger thread, that bigger thread is also not going to work. So it's really limited in its use. And so I like to just thread things manually. So the other thing that I want really to caution you about as you're jumping into buying this sewing machine is not to buy more sewing machine than you need. You can pay a lot of extra money for bells and whistles that you really don't need. By this, I'm talking specifically about 50 stitches instead of 20. They all seem to have 20 on them nowadays. And what do you need? You need like 2 or 3. You need front, back, and zigzag. That you definitely need. Beyond that, I use overlock a lot on modern machines. There's a knit stitch that goes sort of forward and backward. And then there are buttonholing is a nice thing that most machines can do. Another thing you're not going to really need is an industrial sewing machine. So you might see a deal on an industrial sewing machine, in which case you should call me because I could work with an industrial machine. You're not going to want that as a beginning machine. They're really heavy weight and they take off like a jet. And it is so hard when you're learning to sew, just to go slow on a regular machine. So I would steer away from a big industrial machine. There's a lot of appeal to this idea of the serger because you can cut your little seams straight and sew them at the same time, but it's not a good sewing machine for a beginner. First of all, it's very complicated to thread, even the easy thread ones. And second of all, if you make a mistake, there's no going back because you've cut off fabric and your garment will get smaller and smaller as you try and fix those mistakes. So I'd stay away from a serger as a beginner. I'd stay away from anything heavily computerized. My one little story around that is I had a student and I advised her mom to get her a secondhand machine, and they ended up getting a very high-end quilting machine that was being sold at a low price, and it had an intermittent glitch in it. Actually, the machine sewed fine, but it had this intermittent glitch. It would make a noise and the light would blink off, and that really bothered the young tailor that was working with it. So I just stay away from anything overly computerized on your first machine. It's just as well to, be working with mechanical things, which are much easier to troubleshoot than computer problems. Another thing I'd like to debunk is I've heard people say, well, I need this, that, or the other sewing machine because I'm going to be doing denim or I'm going to be doing leather. I've had people look at my vintage machines and say, but that can't sew leather, can it? Well, it's going to sew leather way better than the little plastic machines that you get nowadays, because this is a machine that was made with metal parts. Yes, all of these sewing machines can sew leather. When I first started working with leathers, I went to Tandy Leather and I was like, hey, I want a sewing machine that can sew leather. And they're like, yeah, well, any sewing machine can do that. And I didn't believe them. I went to the sewing machine store and I said, I want to get a FAF and I want it to be a good enough sewing machine that I can sew leather projects on it. And they said, oh, well, we don't sell SAF, but you need this Janome Skyline. This is our last one. So we're going to sell you this one because if you're really going to be doing leathers and stuff, this is the machine you need. Not, hey, you really don't need a specific machine for this. No, this was another story where somebody gave me bad advice. I did buy that machine. It was super expensive. And here's the thing that really gets me is there's nothing I can't do on my brother that I can do on that. There really is nothing. And the other thing that really gets me is when it's hot in the room, my fancy machine makes a high-pitched whine. The whole time it's on. I'm sitting there pinning. So this was another case where I took advice from a salesperson who wanted to sell me something and really, really got a bad deal. So don't do that. Don't listen to somebody that wants to sell you something. Here's another thing that might tempt you. My first encounter with one of those adorable, oh my gosh, it's like 6 inches wide, those adorable, cute little kid machines. My friend Michelle had picked one up in a thrift store and we were so stoked. And I got to tell you, we spent like an hour and a half trying to get that thing to thread up and to sew. And it wasn't an electronic problem. It really was just that janky, It was so wonky the way that things went together and the way things worked. Why not spend $15 more and get something you can use for a lifetime, a used sewing machine that's actually a full-on sewing machine? Why not get that instead of a headache that's just going to go into landfill in no time at all, that can't be repaired? There's so many things that are wrong with these cheapo little machines. Do not get them. If you have found a sewing machine that's a kid's sewing machine that really does sew like a dream, I'd be so excited to hear about it because I think it's like a unicorn, something that just doesn't exist. Parents, I understand that if you're getting your child a gift, you want to buy them something new. Okay, so here's my recommendation. Buy them a dress form. Just a cheap little dress form. They will get tons of mileage out of that. It will make them feel so fancy. But do not buy them a cheapo sewing machine. Give them an allowance and encourage them to buy their own used sewing machine for all of maybe $10 or $15 more than you would have paid for that kid landfill garbage. Help them get a vintage machine and it'll last them a lifetime. These things can go forever. Wouldn't something like that be better than landfill? There are some very trustworthy brands that make really high-end machines that you're going to pay more for, like FAF or Janome. These are lifetime investment brands. If you're buying a beginner machine new, I recommend either Brother or Singer. Both of these are very easy to learn and they're very low price points. Brother is a little easier because it has a top-loading bobbin. The trade-off is that with the Singer beginner machines, you have more control over the bobbin tension, so you can use thicker, heavier weight threads in the bottom, which you can't on a Brother. So here's the thing about sewing machines is it is actually hard to break them, but it's very easy to blame them because a lot of little things go wrong all the time that we have to sort out and troubleshoot. And that is true of all sewing machines, from the very best industrial sewing machines that I've worked with to the absolute cheapest things that I've ever put my hands on. These little kid machines. They all need the bobbin needs to be sorted out at different times. The machine needs to be rethreaded. That's par for the course. So let's talk about what you want to take with you to test that machine out. So first of all, you're going to need some thread. I would take a good quality thread like Gutermann so that it's not giving you any trouble and you're not becoming confused as to whether the machine's having problems or the thread. I also, wherever it is that you've learned to sew, I'd wind a bobbin up there because you don't want to use one of the bobbins that the person has in their sewing machine. One of the things that can really mess up a machine's ability to sew is a poorly wound bobbin. So you want to make sure that you looked in the manual for the kind of machine you're going to, that you have the right kind of bobbin, and that it's all wound nicely so it looks nice and neat. So you've got your thread, you've got your bobbin, you've got some snips to snip the thread off, a little scrap of medium weight fabric, very helpful to have, and a sewing machine needle. Now I think you're good to go. Yeah, don't use the needle that's in the machine already. It could be dull, it could be bent, it could be broken. Those things are all misleading and you might not get a nice clean stitch. One time I found a sewing machine at a thrift store and it didn't have a power pedal, but I was able to look up online that the power pedal was available and I had my little sewing kit. So I put my bobbin in, I put my thread in, and I hand cranked the wheel and I made a test stitch. So you can check out a sewing machine even if it doesn't have the power adapter. Now you are taking a chance that there's an electronic problem with where the power adapter goes in, but it's statistically a whole lot more likely that they just lost the foot pedal, because those get lost from their sewing machines very easily. Whereas the internal of the foot pedal is not, it doesn't see the stress that that foot pedal and the cord see. So it's not likely that that's going to be your issue. So I'd say it's a gamble worth taking, you know, when you're talking $35, $40. With a used machine, seeing it sew a clean line of stitching is more important than the brand, right? We're just looking for a test stitch where you turn it over and the bottom side and the top side look nice and clean. But before you take the time to go and look at a used sewing machine, it's worth doing a quick Google search on your phone to make sure that the user's manual can be found, and bookmark that with the threading page. Another thing to check in the manual is if it takes specific kinds of bobbins. I once got an incredible deal on a sewing machine because they thought it was broken because they were using the wrong kind of bobbins in it and it kept jamming up. So figure out what kind of bobbin you need, and if you have to take a specialty bobbin with you, it's like a $3 or $5 investment to make sure that sewing machine actually works. Again, I do have a video on how to thread a sewing machine where I show the same process on 6 versions from vintage to modern, so you'll have a solid idea of what threading looks like. I also like to search for replacement parts like a foot pedal and light bulb just to make sure that they're easy to find. Some even come up on Amazon, then I know it's going to be really easy to get if I need anything. Testing process, you're going to plug it in, you're going to wind the bobbin, you're going to seat the bobbin, you're going to do the top thread, you're going to test the front stitch, test the back stitch, and everything works. That's a decent machine. Buy it, take it home if the price is right and it was easy. You don't need to look further. This is what you want your machine to be able to do. So there are broken machines. So if you get there and you can't plug it in, or you can't get the light to turn on, or you can't move the bobbin from one place to another, if it's broken, don't buy it. Oh, geez. No matter what I do, we're buddies here. To sum it all up in a few words, my advice is to find a used machine that's close to you, that's cheap, and go and test it out, and if it works, buy it. And I have bought 6 sewing machines this way, all for under $75. They all work great on everything from denim to lightweight silk. And if you're going to get a sewing machine and you're ready for the next step, check out the next video in this playlist where I'm going to talk about troubleshooting some really common sewing issues that you're going to have, like threads jamming up and stuff like that.